that the report is out, don't you think that you should turn your eye on the members of the board? Because the members of the board sat down before anybody could have known. Before anybody could have known, they had to have known that something was wrong. They had to have known that something was wrong, and they said nothing. And by the way, I do have to track back a little bit because I did. You're asking me what went wrong and the knowledge I had. People would think that I knew because I was the Minister of Finance. But yeah, I'll give you an example. The same the INCs were propping up CIB. INCs were propping up CIB. And of course, it is reasonable for people in the public to think, well, she's the Minister of Finance. How she didn't know about that? You're not going to tell us that she didn't know NIB, NGC, Unit Trust was in trouble. How she could say that to us? Well, I will tell you, and you can ask, and you will find out. The INC's number one was not CIB, Clico Investment Bank, was started because people ask this conflict of interest. Why was Mr. Brown, after Raymond asked the question, why did Mr. Brown not be made the Minister of Finance and he made the junior minister to you? And why did Mr. Manning favor you and not you, Mr. Brown? Well, you know what I would say to that? This is hindsight, of course, but I think it's valid. The same conflict of interest, which they are talking about, was the MOU clearly was not in interest of CL Financial. So if it's not in interest of CL Financial, it could not be in my interest because that's the argument, right? And it's not my saying so. It's the Court of Appeal saying so. It's Mr. Dupree saying so. But the problem that Mr. Brown would have had is that he started the CIB. He would have been involved in formulating the INCs. And most importantly, he was the head of the state enterprises. When I came in as minister, the Prime Minister gave that portfolio to Minister Brown. The INCs were bought by the state enterprises. So I cannot say he knew, but my goodness, if anybody had, because what we also did, we had a manual prepared at the very, very beginning. The Deputy Permanent Secretary was told to prepare a manual because we wanted to make sure the decisions of those boards came back to the ministry. So that every one of those meetings, either a permanent secretary, a deputy permanent secretary, or senior minister in the ministry attended those meetings so they could come back to the Ministry of Finance and report the decisions of those boards. So I am saying there's a presumed conflict because if you are a former treasurer of the PNM, if you started the CIB, if you were involved in the formulation of the INCs, and most importantly, you were in charge of state enterprises, the question would be, there would be a presumption of knowledge. And if you have presumption of knowledge, the question would be, did you tell me? No, he did not. No, he did not. No, he did not. I never, ever, I didn't even know what the INC is. People think, I understand why people would say how she would not know, but you have to understand, I wasn't running a company. I was there dealing with property tax. I had a number of things until the governor came and told me something. And the other thing too, there was always this issue of the independence of the office of the central bank governor. So I was very careful not to, I said if there was anything I needed to know, he certainly would let me know. He had meetings on the 7th of January with Lawrence Dupree. He had meetings with Carl Hirolal. I didn't know about these meetings, And when I knew about these meetings? When I read the documents. That's when I only found when I read those documents. So Carl Hirolal, Deputy Governor Wendy Hosan, Central Bank Governor on the 17th of January, met with Lawrence Dupree and expressed their concerns. They said there were too many inter-party transactions. You had to reduce it. There were major concerns, and Mr. Dupree gave the undertaking that he would address it. But the problem there, from what I read in the report now, this is report now, it is clear that the governor was frustrated dealing with CL Financial. He was frustrated because they would say to him, they would prevaricate, they would procrastinate, they would give assurances, they would do X, Y, and Z, and they would not. And also sometimes even the letters back to him were either abusive and they used the word rude. So by the time I came in, all I do remember, this is what I do remember, is that the governor said to me, I want you to make the amendment to the FIA. No, I don't know why, but I trusted the governor. But I did really ask him why was that? He said, well, it was CL Financial. He says CL Financial is a huge conglomerate and there are too many inter-party transactions. And he wants to have legislation that limits the amount because the FIA, as it currently stood, did not limit the exposure. So when we did pass the FIA at the beginning of 2008, end of 2008, I believe, I think it did put pressure on CL Financial, because what they were used to doing, which was lending to each other unsecured, and whatever they were able to do, because there was no limit in the law on the inter-party transactions. For the first time, that exposure was limited, so they could not do as they wanted. That is what I remember about the governor of the central bank. So when we talk about the conflict of interest, I can't, when I talk about conflict of interest, I didn't know what an INC was. I didn't know that if it is reasonable for me to think that if there were such concerns, either the governor would come and say to me, which he apparently did on February 14th with the prime minister, or the minister in the ministry would come to me and say, listen, we're getting too many complaints about this, and maybe you need to speak to the prime minister, maybe you need to speak to the governor. That never ever happened, because I was never ever told. I am just saying that there will be a presumption of knowledge. Certainly, that's something that you had to have been apprised of, that something was wrong. And that was never relayed to me in any form at all until that 14th of January.